The barn smelled of damp straw and sorrow. Ash, a starved mustang with ribs like jagged shadows beneath his skin, lay motionless in the corner. His body was still, but his eyes told another story, dull but not gone. Standing near him was Agnes Rowley, a silver-haired woman in her late 70s. Her floral dress fluttered slightly from the draft coming through the cracks in the barn wall. She stared at the broken horse as if she were witnessing the ghost of someone she loved. "You didn't deserve this," she whispered. The heavy barn door creaked open. Light spilled in, along with a man in uniform and a powerful dog at his side. Officer Dean Holbrook stepped carefully, scanning the room. His partner, Boone, a lean and focused Belgian Malinois, immediately tensed. With ears perked and tail stiff, Boone let out a sharp bark, not of aggression, but alert. Something wasn't right. Agnes didn't turn around. Her voice was soft, tired. "It's my son," she said. "He stopped caring after Harold died." Then came the drinking, the yelling. The animals suffered first. Her voice cracked. "Ash was born on this land. I used to watch him run across these fields like wildfire." She looked down. "Now he can barely lift his head." Boone crept closer to Ash, nose twitching, body low. He sniffed along the horse's shoulder and let out a low, guttural whine, something close to grief. Ash blinked then, to Agnes's shock, tried to move. His legs failed him, but the attempt was something. Boone sat beside him, close enough for the horse to feel his warmth. A quiet, almost sacred moment passed between them. Dean moved through the barn with purpose, flashlight in hand. Straw crunched beneath his boots as he swept the beam across the shadows. Then he froze. Hidden beneath a pile of hay, he spotted a branding iron, its metal tip blackened, edges stained. His face hardened. This wasn't just neglect. Someone was hurting him, deliberately. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the wooden panels like a warning. Inside, Boone stayed at Ash's side, unmoving, guarding him as if he were more than just a horse, as if he understood the pain written in every bone of his body. And in that moment, Agnes felt something shift. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of something else. A reckoning. If you're still here, it's because this story is speaking to you, just like Ash's silent struggle speaks to us. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more powerful stories like this one, and it shows you're one of the people who still believe animals deserve love, not pain. Let's keep going. Ash's story isn't over yet. Agnes sat just outside the barn, her hands trembling in her lap as Boone remained beside Ash, refusing to leave his side. The rain had started to fall gently, tapping against the tin roof in a slow, steady rhythm. Inside, Officer Dean Holbrook spoke into his radio, his voice low but firm. He had called in backup and a veterinary unit, but deep down, he already knew this case was bigger than a simple welfare check. Something about the scene, the silence, the tools, the bruises on Ash's legs, told him this was part of something darker. Boone's ears twitched at every sound. His eyes never left Ash. Occasionally, he would lean in, resting his head gently on the horse's neck, as if offering strength the mustang no longer had. It was more than training. It was instinct. Agnes watched them through the barn doors with a knot tightening in her chest. Boone wasn't just protecting Ash, he was grieving with him. "I should have stopped Caleb sooner," Agnes said, her voice cracking. "I knew. I saw the changes. The way he looked at the animals like they were just objects. Ash was like family, but Caleb," she trailed off, unable to say more. Dean approached her slowly, the weight of her confession hanging between them like heavy air. "You were scared," he said gently. "That doesn't make you guilty. But now, we do something about it." Just then, Ash let out a low, throaty exhale, half pain, half effort. Boone stood immediately, alert, and Dean stepped back inside. The horse was trying to lift himself again, legs twitching, hooves scraping against the straw. It wasn't strength that moved him, it was Boone. The dog's presence had stirred something in the Mustang's spirit, something no human could reach. Dean knelt beside the horse, examining his flanks more closely. There were burn marks, faint but undeniable. He was being punished, Dean muttered under his breath. Or worse, trained. He turned to Agnes. Was Caleb ever involved in anything illegal? Fights? Racing? Agnes shook her head slowly, but doubt clouded her expression. No, at least, not that I knew of. But lately, there were men coming around. Strangers. And he always made sure I stayed in the house. Dean's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a case of abuse, it was organized cruelty. Something he'd seen before, and something Boone had been trained to detect. Outside, the rain picked up and thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the air thickened. The past was rising like smoke from the floorboards, and Caleb's secrets were beginning to crack open, one breath of truth at a time. The backup finally arrived. 2 deputies from the county pulled up in a patrol truck, followed by a volunteer veterinarian, Dr. Lyle Camden, a retired equine specialist who still took emergency calls for old friends. Dean briefed them quickly, pointing out the branding iron, the visible wounds on Ash, and the disturbing signs of confinement. Boone stood close to the horse as Dr. Camden entered, his presence almost as necessary as the vet's tools. Agnes kept a hand pressed to her mouth as she watched Dr. Camden examine Ash with slow, careful movements. He's dehydrated, malnourished, and there's scarring I don't like, the vet muttered. But what worries me more is his reaction to touch. He flinches at every movement. He glanced up at Dean. This horse's spirit was broken. Not from an accident. This was deliberate. Boone let out a low growl, his instincts reacting to the scent of fear and pain thick in the air. Dean stepped outside for a moment, needing space to think. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of wet hay and something else, motor oil. He walked toward the side of the barn where an old shed leaned crookedly against a fence. As he approached, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud and cigarette butts, not the kind Agnes would smoke. Someone had been here recently, and they had watched. Back inside, Agnes sat beside Ash, her hand gently stroking his neck. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I thought Caleb was just angry. I didn't see how far he had fallen." Boone remained close, watching Agnes with soft eyes. There was forgiveness in the room, but it was too early for healing. The truth was still crawling out of the shadows. Just as Dean returned to the barn, his radio crackled. "Sheriff to Holbrook, we got a call from a neighbor. Said they saw Caleb leave this morning with 2 men in a black truck, headed toward the backwoods off Hollow Creek Road." Dean's stomach turned. That was deep into private land, the kind of place people went to disappear, or to hide things they didn't want found. Dean looked at Agnes. "I need you to be honest with me now. Has Caleb ever brought animals back injured? Hidden things from you?" She hesitated, then slowly nodded. "A few months ago, he came back one night with blood on his hands. Said it was nothing. But I heard noises in the shed for days. I tried to block it out." Dean exchanged a glance with Boone. The pieces were falling into place, and what they pointed to was far worse than anyone expected. Dean approached the old shed with caution. Its hinges were rusted, and the door leaned slightly off-center, like it hadn't been opened in years, or like someone wanted it to look that way. Boone stayed close, ears high, nose to the ground. As Dean reached for the handle, Boone let out a short, urgent bark and pawed at the door. Dean unholstered his flashlight, heart beating louder than the wind behind him, and pulled the door open. The stench hit him instantly, rot, sweat, and something worse. Fear, soaked into wood and rusted metal. Inside were signs of a hidden operation. Chains bolted to the floor. Muzzles. A blood-stained tarp. The kind of setup that wasn't used for livestock care, it was for control. Dean's eyes narrowed. He was training them to fight, he muttered. Not just horses, dogs too. Boone let out a low growl and refused to go any farther. Even he could sense the cruelty embedded in that space. Back at the barn, Agnes tried to keep calm as Dr. Camden administered fluids to Ash. The horse had stopped trembling, and though his eyes remained half-closed, his breathing had become more steady. Agnes whispered softly to him, her hand resting over his shoulder, like a mother with a sleeping child. "You're safe now," she said. "You hear me, Ash? No one's ever going to hurt you again." Dean returned, his jaw tight. "Agnes, I'm gonna be straight with you," he said. "This wasn't just your son being reckless or angry. What he was doing, this is federal-level cruelty. If we find more evidence out there, he's going away for a long time." Agnes closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I gave him every chance. I kept hoping the boy I raised would come back." Boone paced near the barn entrance, then suddenly stopped, staring at the tree line behind the property. A shape moved there, too quick to identify. Dean caught the movement too and instinctively grabbed his radio. "This is Holbrook. Possible visual on suspect. Moving west behind the barn. I'm going after him." Boone didn't wait for a command. He bolted toward the trees, silent and fast. As Dean chased after him, Agnes stood, heart racing. She looked back at Ash one last time, then to the shadows beyond the barn where the wind was now screaming through the trees. Something told her this wasn't over, that what lay ahead was more dangerous than anyone was prepared for. Caleb was out there, and he knew they had uncovered everything. Boone darted through the underbrush like a shadow, weaving between trees and leaping over roots with purpose. Officer Dean Holbrook followed close behind, breath heavy, boots sinking into the soft, rain-soaked earth. The air was thick with pine, wet leaves, and something metallic. Boone barked once, sharp, focused, then disappeared behind a ridge. Dean pressed on, adrenaline sharpening his senses. He knew this land. Hollow Creek was remote, and if Caleb knew where to go, he could vanish for days. Behind the barn, Agnes stood frozen, watching the tree lean long after Dean had disappeared. A part of her wanted to run after them, but her legs wouldn't move. She turned back to Ash, who was now resting his head in the hay, his breathing slow and steady. Dr. Camden placed a warm blanket over the horse and looked at Agnes with quiet seriousness. "He's not out of danger yet," he said, "but he's fighting. That says a lot." Agnes nodded, though her thoughts were far from the barn now. Dean climbed the ridge, mud pulling at his boots. Up ahead, Boone barked again, this time more aggressively. Dean pushed forward and emerged into a small clearing. There, half hidden behind a fallen tree, was Caleb. His clothes were soaked, his eyes wild. In one hand, he gripped a rusted crowbar. In the other, a cigarette burned to the filter. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. Dean raised a hand slowly. "You don't have to do this, Caleb. It's over. We know everything. The branding, the shed, the blood, it's all been documented." Boone found Ash barely alive. Caleb's face twisted, torn between guilt and rage. That horse was never right. Always wild. Like he knew I wasn't good enough. "You don't get it, none of you do." Boone stood between the two men, low and steady, his body tensed. Dean didn't blink. "You're wrong. Ash trusted you once. You broke that. But there's still a choice here. Don't go deeper than you already have." Caleb took a step forward, crowbar twitching in his hand. The tension snapped in the air, just as lightning flashed above, illuminating the raw pain in his face. And then, something changed. Boone took a step forward, but not in aggression, in understanding. He sat down, still, watching. Caleb stared at the dog, breathing hard. The crowbar dropped with a dull thud. He looked up at Dean, eyes filled with something that almost resembled surrender. "I didn't want to be like him," he muttered. "My father. I swore I wouldn't." Dean slowly stepped forward, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Then let's stop the cycle. Right now." What would you have done in Dean's place? Would you have trusted that Caleb truly wanted to change, or played it safer? Boone seemed to sense something deeper. Do animals know when someone still has a chance at redemption? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about this moment. Your perspective might just open someone else's eyes. The rain fell harder now, soaking both men as they stood in the clearing. Dean kept a firm grip on Caleb's arm, but there was no resistance anymore. Caleb's shoulders had slumped, his fight gone. Boone stood beside them, alert but calm, his eyes scanning the woods as if still protecting them from threats unseen. The moment was heavy, not just with water, but with everything unspoken between past and present. As they walked back toward the barn, Caleb's steps were slow, almost reluctant. "You think they'll lock me up for life?" he asked quietly. Dean didn't sugarcoat his answer. "Probably for a while. Animal cruelty, illegal training, possible trafficking. There'll be charges, Caleb. A lot of them." Caleb gave a bitter laugh. "Guess I deserve it." Dean didn't answer right away. What do you say to a man drowning in the wreckage of his own choices? When they arrived, Agnes was sitting on a stool beside Ash, stroking the horse's neck as Dr. Camden adjusted the fore. Her eyes locked on her son the second he stepped through the barn doors, soaked and defeated. She didn't move, didn't cry, she just stared. Caleb couldn't hold her gaze. "Mama, he started, but the words broke apart in his mouth. Agnes looked at Dean instead. "Is it done?" Her voice was flat. Dean nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Boone trotted over to Ash and laid down beside him again. His body curled. Boone trotted over to Ash and laid down beside him again. His body curled protectively against the horse's side. Caleb watched in silence, something softening behind his eyes. That dog, he never backed down. Even when His voice faded, and for a moment he looked smaller than ever. Why would he care so much about an old, broken horse? Agnes finally looked at her son. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "Because Boone has something you lost, Caleb, mercy." Dean led Caleb to the squad car parked outside. No cuffs were needed. Caleb didn't run, didn't beg. As the car door closed behind him, the storm began to break, and sunlight started piercing through the clouds. Back in the barn, Ash shifted, letting out a low snort, weak but steady. Agnes smiled through her tears. "You're still here, aren't you, old boy? You're still fighting." And Boone, faithful as ever, stayed at Ash's side, guarding him, healing him in ways no medicine could. Because some pain doesn't need words, only presence. The barn was quieter now. The chaos of sirens and flashing lights had faded into memory, leaving only the steady rhythm of recovery. Ash lay curled in fresh straw, a clean blanket draped over his frail body. Boone remained close, his chin resting gently on his paws, eyes never far from the horse. Agnes sat just behind them, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, though it had gone cold long ago. She wasn't ready to leave Ash's side, not yet. Dr. Camden had returned early that morning to check on Ash's condition. His tone was more hopeful this time. "There's progress," he told Agnes. "He's responding to fluids, and he tried to lift himself again while I was changing the dressing. He's still got a long way to go, but he wants to live." That last sentence clung to Agnes like a prayer. She nodded slowly, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "He always did," she murmured. Later that afternoon, Officer Dean Holbrook stopped by. He brought updates. Caleb was officially in custody, no bail, and a full investigation was underway. But that wasn't why he came. He walked into the barn with a softness in his eyes. "I thought maybe I could check in on Boone," he said, though he clearly meant more. Agnes looked up at him and offered a weak smile. "He never left Ash's side. Not once. That dog. He knows things we can't explain." Dean crouched beside Boone and gave the dog a gentle pat. Boone lifted his head, then looked back toward Ash. "He's bonded," Dean said. "Sometimes, when they feel the depth of suffering in another creature, they don't let go." Agnes nodded. "Maybe he's here for more than just protection." There was silence for a moment, filled only by the sounds of the barn, birds outside, the rustle of hay, and the quiet breathing of a horse who had survived more than most humans ever would. Agnes stood slowly and walked over to Ash. She placed her hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of life beneath her fingers. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," she whispered. "I should have seen it. I should have done something. But I let fear win." Dean didn't interrupt. He knew guilt had no quick cure, only time and small acts of healing. And maybe forgiveness. As the sun lowered across the hills, casting golden light through the barn's open doors, Ash shifted. With a sudden grunt and effort, he began to lift himself again, hooves scraping the floor, body trembling. Boone stood immediately, moving beside him, tail wagging once. Agnes held her breath. And slowly, inch by inch, Ash rose to his knees. Ash didn't move at first. His thin legs, bruised and worn from weeks, maybe months of cruelty, trembled beneath the weight of his own body. The hay beneath him rustled as he shifted his front legs slightly, nostrils flaring with effort. His breathing was loud and uneven, every inhale a struggle against the damage done. Yet even through the exhaustion, something had returned to his eyes, a faint, flickering light. Not fear. Not resignation. Determination. Agnes, kneeling in the straw beside him, reached out with a trembling hand and placed it softly against his neck. "That's it, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice quivering with hope. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. We're here. We're not going anywhere." Boone, ever faithful, stood directly in front of Ash, his posture tall and calm. His head tilted slightly as he observed the horse's smallest movements. The connection between the two had become undeniable, not just survival instinct, but something deeper. Boone had never once barked at Ash in fear or dominance. He had only offered presence. Loyalty. That unshakable silence dogs seem to carry when they know someone is hurting. With a subtle shift of his paws, Boone stepped back, giving Ash a clear path, his eyes locked on the Mustang as if to say, "You can do this. I've got you." In the barn's wide doorway, Officer Dean Holbrook stood with arms crossed, leaning slightly against the wooden frame. His uniform was wrinkled from the long hours, boots still damp from the storm, but his eyes were wide with something rarely seen in his line of work: reverence. He had spent years witnessing the aftermath of cruelty, but rarely had he seen a recovery like this begin so quickly, and with such quiet power. This wasn't just a horse getting to his feet. This was a symbol of every silent victim who had once been voiceless. Dean didn't speak. He didn't need to. The barn had become sacred ground. Ash's hooves scraped along the barn floor as he shifted again, his front legs finding more stability. Agnes pulled back slightly, allowing him room. Boone barked once, sharp, focused, and Ash's ears twitched at the sound. Then, as if that bark ignited something primal, something that had never fully left him, Ash pushed. His hind legs trembled as he tucked them underneath himself, and with a labored grunt, he lifted his chest first, then, inch by inch, rose to all fours. The Mustang wobbled, his legs shaking beneath him, but he did not fall. Agnes gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyes flooded with tears, Not from fear but from wonder, the kind that breaks your heart and heals it all at once. She took a step closer, gently brushing her hand along Ash's shoulder. "There you are," she whispered. "You came back to me." Boone wagged his tail slowly, then sat beside the horse, his head tilted upward as if standing guard. Dean stepped forward now, speaking softly. "Takes more than chains and fear to destroy a spirit like his," he said. "But it sure as hell takes love to bring one back." Ash slowly turned his head toward Agnes. The look in his eyes wasn't just recognition, it was memory. Through all the pain, something had survived. Something she thought had been lost. And in that moment, under the fading light of afternoon and the earthy warmth of the barn, something shifted between them all. Not just healing. Resilience. The quiet kind, the kind that grows in broken places. And as Ash stood there, shaky but upright, exhausted but alive, it was clear, this wasn't the end of his fight. This was just the beginning. A semana seguente tru uma nova rotina ao velho celero de Agnes Rowley. Mornings no campo haviam sempre comunicado calm silence and dew, but now they began with a soft rhythm of hooves tapping gently across the barn floor. Ash, though still visibly thin and scarred, now stood with more stability, occasionally walking a few slow, shaky laps under Boone's careful watch. The transformation wasn't fast, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Agnes, that meant everything. Every day, she would greet him with the same soft words, "You're stronger today, aren't you?" And every day, Ash would respond in small but meaningful ways, lifting his head higher, nudging her hand, sometimes even letting out a quiet snort when Boone barked playfully at the wind. The barn that once held ghosts had become a place of quiet redemption. Boone remained as loyal as ever, shadowing Ash as if he were guarding something sacred. In truth, he was. Dean visited often now, not as an officer, but as a friend. He brought fresh hay, restocked supplies, and stayed to help Agnes reinforce the old fencing around the pasture. "You know," he said one afternoon while hammering in a new gate post, "I've seen a lot of people give up after something like this. Most folks would have let someone else handle it. But you stayed." Agnes looked up from the feed bin, her eyes tired but resolute. "I couldn't leave him," she said. "I left once. I didn't speak when I should have. I'm not making that mistake again." They didn't talk about Caleb much. His trial was underway, and Dean only brought updates when necessary. Agnes listened, but never asked for details. The truth was too heavy, too close. But there was a shift inside her, a quiet strength where there had once been guilt. She had chosen to live in the aftermath, not the memory. Her bond with Ash had become her way forward. Every day that he stood, that he walked, that he simply breathed, she felt a piece of herself heal too. One morning, Boone did something no one expected. As Agnes opened the barn doors to let in the sunrise, Boone walked to Ash's side and gently nudged him toward the light. Ash hesitated, then stepped forward, one hoof, then another, until he crossed the threshold and felt the sun warm his battered coat. It was his first time outside since the day Dean had found him. Agnes covered her mouth, tears brimming again, but this time not from sorrow. "You're free," she whispered. And there, beneath the soft glow of morning, a horse once left for dead stood tall beside the dog who refused to leave him, and the woman who refused to give up on either of them. The air was cool, the grass soft beneath his hooves, and as the breeze passed through the trees, Agnes could almost hear it, the sound of something lost returning home. Spring arrived quietly in Ashford County. The frost had melted, the grass was greener, and Agnes Rowley's land had begun to look alive again. What was once a silent, broken place now echoed calm au psalm suave de vida, birds singing, wind brushing through the trees, and hooves tapping gently on fresh earth. Ash had fully moved into the pasture behind the barn. His steps were slow, sometimes stiff, but his spirit had returned. He no longer walked like he was being watched. He walked like he belonged. Agnes came out every morning just after sunrise, a warm biscuit wrapped in a napkin for Boone, and a gentle voice for Ash. The Mustang would always lift his head at the sound of her steps, ears turning toward her like compass needles. Boone had long since claimed the barn as his second home, or maybe his first. He still slept beside Ash many nights, especially when the wind grew cold or the coyotes howled in the distance. It was an unspoken promise between them, "I'll stay as long as you need me." Dean Holbrook visited less often now, but when he did, it wasn't as a sheriff. He'd come with coffee and fence nails, or just to sit for a while on the porch with Agnes. One day, he brought news. Caleb had pleaded guilty to multiple charges. No trial, no drama, just silence. Maybe even remorse. Agnes listened, nodding slowly. "It's strange," she said. "Even after everything, he was still my son." Dean placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "And you're still a mother," he replied. "That won't ever change." Agnes spent the afternoons brushing Ash's coat, whispering to him like she had when he was just a foal. "You remember Harold, don't you?" she'd say, smiling. "He would have loved seeing you like this." There were still moments when memories crept in, memories of what they had lost, what they had survived. But now, they came like gentle waves, not like storms. And always, Boone was there. Always watching, always listening. One Sunday, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky with gold and lavender, Ash did something he hadn't done in over a year. He ran. It wasn't far, and it wasn't fast, but it was real. His legs stretched, hooves kicked up small clouds of dust, and for a few seconds, he looked like the wild soul he had once been. Agnes watched from the fence line, hands clasped to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Boone barked once and chased him, tail wagging, joy sparking in every leap. In that moment, everything came full circle. The pain, the silence, the brokenness. All of it had led here, to this quiet piece of land, to a woman who refused to stop loving, to a dog who refused to leave, and to a horse who refused to give up. And as the wind moved through the grass and the stars began to rise, there was no doubt left. Ash was finally home. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing powerful stories that inspire and heal. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that might stay with you forever.